Hello, everyone, and welcome to Knative series. And this is the second one from the series, which is on Knative 101. My name is Sayam Parak. I'm a CNCF ambassador and working as Director of Technical Evangelism at CIVO. Very excited to be here, come up every day and bring something new for the community. I learn a lot, and you people learn with me. So it's always great fun to be with you all. So if you are new to the channel, please care to subscribe. And if you're watching on Twitch, then please care to follow because that's what's keep me going on for the rest of the stream and bringing you awesome content with the awesome people like you can see on the screen. So today I'm joined by Carlos and we'll be talking about Knative 101. In the previous stream, Ville and Matt, we discussed about the origin, the history of Knative, where it came from, what were the challenges they were trying to solve, some of the predictions that they did which actually are have been proven true, and their vision which they thought have been very good for the over the next set of decade that they thought previously. So I think that's pretty interesting. That was pretty interesting to hear. So if you have not gone through the first stream, I would recommend please do check that out because that will give you the history of Knative, why it is into existence, and also a lot about the governance, which is very important, like where it was, where it is now, how, why, and how you should trust the Knative community and the governing folks. And also a very important thing that was discussed was like you can reach out to the Knative folks if you are having any issues in adopting Knative. So that was pretty interesting. So you can reach out in any way. And there are a lot of community initiatives that are being driven by the community itself, which you can obviously see on the Knative Slack. So there is a monthly community meeting where people, different use cases of Knative are being, showcased to the community. And then I am doing the Knative series, so which is bringing out the Knative to you, the Knative world to you, so that you can adopt this awesome technology. And then if any issues you run into, obviously there is a big amount of folks that are behind the project, ready to help, and hungry for contributions. So these are some of the things that I want to start with, some of the recap. And today we'll be discussing about Knative 101 in a kind of technical manner, because previously we focused on the user's perspective, the community perspective. So today will be all technical, and we'll be having like what Knative is, what is the architecture, and we'll be having short demos of a serving 101 and eventing 101 done by Carlos. Obviously, the follow-up streams will be having a very much deep dive on each of the sections. But to set the stage, to make things right for the introductory, what it is, and with the live demos, obviously, we have Carlos with us today. So, hi, Carlos. Welcome to the stream, and thank you for giving time, spending time with us. And please introduce yourself to the community.
Oh, thank you for having me. No, this is a exciting episode. I watch your lives. Carlos Santana. I work on IBM Cloud. I'm a cloud native architect. Help customers, enterprise customers, usually get into modernizing their applications into Kubernetes, OpenShift, and I also a open source contributor to mostly open source projects related with serverless. So I started with OpenWhisk, and now we move the team and myself to Knative, and we've been working with Knative since 2018, I believe. So yeah, excited to show what we have in place and soon to be GA. So we're going to get into that 1.1, 1.0 soon.
Awesome. So excited for this stream. And yeah, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And we will be starting now because we are already in 5 minutes. And I hope most of the people have joined in. So please keep sharing on Twitter. So basically, how my community is doing is like they are creating Twitter threads out there of the streams on which they are learning. So I really like them. So I request you to create Twitter threads and about the stream of on what you are learning actually, and also some of the use cases that you think while watching would be useful for yourself, like you will be you will plan to use in a certain way. So Carlos, like let's begin. I think it's the right time. So how would you give the introduction to Knative, like what Knative is?
Yeah, so we'll go. Can you see me? Am I sharing?
Yep,
Um,
yep.
So let me share. I think I'm sharing my screen, right? You can put it in, and we'll start here. So this is Knative 101, and we'll start with the recent work that we have been doing with Knative, and the stream that we did, you folks did on Friday, went over like the community, the governance, and what Knative is. Knative is, and we'll start the journey with what people typically do online, which is looking for Knative, and we use our website as a way of explaining what Knative is. So this is a new website, as new as, like, I would say 2 or 3 weeks. The community got together on working on this, and the first place where developers get started is, we have two audiences. We have an audience for developers and an audience for administrators. Today we're going to focus, since it's the one-on-one, getting started, the developer, of like how to use it, how to deploy apps. And Knative is, was in the past series, was talking about is serving and eventing. So at the bottom you will see the two basic components. You can have serving by itself, or you can have eventing by itself. Um, and that's misconception that people sometimes have, that you have to have serving installed to get eventing, and that's not true. The two components can be installed separately. So serving is the one that talks about scaling to zero. So this tree. Most of the people here are familiar with Kubernetes, and Kubernetes, usually you deploy, if you're going to create a stateless app, usually an HTTP endpoint, you start with the deployment. The thing is, and you can also have horizontal pod auto scaling that will give you more pods as you need more CPU or memory. But in case of, like, when you don't need that many pods, you can only scale to one. So serving in terms of Knative helps you make that deployment or pod scale to zero. And that's one of the kind of like one of the marketing hypes that Knative has. To me, the one that, after working with Kubernetes, that to me is one of the biggest one, is that the amount of cognitive load that you have in Kubernetes when you are going to create a service. Um, and when you create a service, you need to create, and if you're going to expose it externally, and your Kubernetes, you need to learn about what is an ingress, the ingress YAML. If you're going to have HTTPS, how do I get certificates and secrets into that ingress? And then telling the ingress, how do I find the endpoints to a service? So that's the YAML. And that could be like, if you're just getting started, it could be a 1 day of trying, and then 1 day of asking a friend. And then next comes the next one, which is like, well, that service needs to point to a deployment. And then people start learning about selectors, like how do I labels on the deployment matches the service, how the service finds the port. And then you make a typo or you miss a label. And then that's another day of trying, another day asking a friend to learn that. And then you go into the deployment of like configuring the container, and that part is kind of like stays the same. You define a container, you define the container properties, and do that, and then multiply that for many times in terms of scaling to a lot. So to me, that's kind of one of the benefits of serving. And then quickly on eventing, and also I forgot. Then comes the next week, where like a manager or a team lead asks you, like, hey, we want to do traffic splitting because we're going to put a new version. We want to send 10%, test the application, watch the metrics, and if everything is good, maybe increase the percentage by 10% until you get 100%, and decrease on the other one. And things like Istio, Contour, like networking wise, then you have to like change your ingress again, and then convert that YAML into a different YAML for Istio or Contour to just get that traffic splitting. So all these configuration and YAMLs going on just to get a piece of code that you have in Go or Node.js that you want to serve an HTTP request, to have it in a URL like in carlos.com or site.com, becomes very complex and brittle, right? So that's why we go into kind of GitOps. So for eventing is more of like handling events asynchronous way. So if you have things happening in the real world, a fact of life, and you want to address it. And most of developers associate this with webhook. So that's kind of the way I explain it, webhooks. So when you push something to a GitHub repo, you can configure GitHub to send you a webhook. And a webhook is an HTTP post request with JSON. But this could be considered as an event. Something happens, you want to run something. Something happens, you want to run something. And then this is an async programming model that we can work with Cloud Events. So Cloud Events is a CNCF standard. It's already a specification. So Knative give you the building blocks to manage Cloud Events, either from getting sources or managing the syncs. So associating something. So we'll go over the demo. So with that said, let's get down to work with Knative. So if you visit the website, right, you go to Google and go to knative.dev, click on developer on getting started, and this is our new getting started experience. This one is under, let me make a little bit, if you want to install Knative in your like Kubernetes cluster that you have in production or you have in a cloud, you will be an administrator. So that's also another misconception. So we have an installation guide here that goes over all the details because it could be a lot of customization. What we're going to do is getting started. It's like, how do I get Knative the fastest possible, just so I can try it in my laptop? So we'll go with that scene. We're going to use Kind, which is Kubernetes in Docker. It's very popular among the Kubernetes community to get a quick cluster set up in your laptop. You will need the Kubernetes CLI. So let me bring up a terminal. So you see my terminal? Looks fine. And I already have kubectl, right? And I also have Kind. So those are the two things that you need to have as you're going to set up Kubernetes in your laptop. And then we have a quick install that will set up. We'll create. Well, let's run that because that takes about less than 5 minutes. This is something that we're going to introduce into the Knative CLI as a plugin. We're working on that right now. It's a script that I have as a community supported, but it was one of those things that a lot of people were not trying Knative because it took a lot of time to set it up or too complex. When Knative started, it started with one networking layer that which is Istio. So you need to have Kubernetes, but you also need to have one of the networking layers. It could be Istio, and that's the one we started. And we no longer require Istio, and that's where like a lot of people have the misconception of like you need to be an Istio expert to use Knative. In this case, we're using Courier, which is a small networking layer that we have based on Envoy. You can use Contour, you can use Glue. So those are the networking layers, like an ingress that we need, and also the one that is in charge of like the data plane to do that traffic splitting that I taught in the past. Other than that, Knative is very light. So we are going to use Contour. Contour is maintained by Knative community, so it's under the Knative Sandbox organization, and it's a very small Envoy configuration controller, just enough to meet what Knative it wants. So this is something that I did for the community to get, and also for me when people ask in Slack for issues or they want to try something, was for me like I want to set up a clean Kubernetes cluster with Knative with the latest version in less than 5 minutes. So this script, that's what it's doing. It's creating a Kind cluster, which I love Kind. It's a very fast way of testing different versions of Kubernetes. So if you want to test 121, like we're doing here, or you want to do 120 or 119, it's very easy to switch the version of Kubernetes. So the things that it's going to be installing here in this setup is serving and eventing. Like I said before, you can have eventing without serving and serving without eventing. And I'm going to install a small broker because we're going to do a demo with the broker, in-memory broker. But this process should take less than 5 minutes. Let me follow the instructions. And the next thing that it asks you is to install the Knative CLI. So we have a Knative CLI, and some people ask, like, if you have kubectl, why would I need this Knative CLI? Well, you can do everything with the kubectl, but you will need to know what are the resources that you need, what is the information that you want out of the YAML. The Knative CLI is a faster way of having a user experience just focus on that domain. If you maybe don't know a lot of kubectl, or you want to do like things faster with terms of Knative objects, then the Knative CLI is a very good way of doing it. So in this case, we're done. So it's 2 minutes and 31 seconds. In your case, if you're trying at home, it may take up to 4 minutes or 5 minutes, depending on the images of kind, if they're cached or not in your local Docker desktop. You're using Docker desktop with kind. So that's the user experience of getting installed. We went from I would say maybe a long time ago, where people were like, most of all the questions were like, how do I get it installed, or it's not working, or how do I get small things to test it out. So now we have a very easy way of doing it. The Knative CLI, you can install it with Brew, or you can get it, the binary directly from the release page. So I already Brew installed it, so I already have it here installed. I don't know, you can see my terminal or make it bigger. So I have the Knative CLI installed. So I have kubectl, which I pronounce kubectl. A lot of people argue with me, it's kubectl. I just call it kubectl, and then kn. And we follow along. We'll do the first one. We'll do serving, and we'll create our first Knative service. Basically, what we want is, if you have a container, how do we make that container or source code? In this case, we're not going to concentrate a lot of the build part. Like Matt mentioned in the last series, build was part of Knative. That piece of work became pipelines and then became stacked on pipelines. So it's a way of orchestrating and doing the build. In this case, in Knative, we assume that you already have a container. It could be built with Canico, with Builda, with build packs, with Docker even, right, to build the image. And that's a lot of projects, good projects for that. So let's work the CLI, make a little bit this bigger so we can see what it's going to do. So we're going to do a kn service create. We're going to pass it an image. And that's the minimum information that you need to pass to Knative. I have an image that is basically a web server. There are more parameters, so you can pass, for example, the port. So if it's not 8080 is the default, but it's like for example, Node.js. A lot of Node.js or Express examples is 3000. So you can change this to 3000 or 8000 or 9080. You can pass a design configuration to that Knative, like an environment variable, and then we'll use this revision. And going deeper into revisions a little bit later to name this configuration. So let's run that in our terminal, and we should get from that image that is located in the container registry, right? It could be Quay, any of the container registries. It could be a private one. And then basically what it's going to do is that what I explained before is handling the ingress configuration YAML. If you have a configure with auto TLS, it will configure the TLS. It will create a service. It will create deployment. So it will create all these YAMLs in the behind the scenes, but we have some extra components that will help orchestrate this deployment at the end of the day. So that's it. It took, in my case, it took 35 seconds, and I have a URL. And that URL now, if I curl it, right, let's scroll this URL. It's running my laptop. It says hello world. If I can open it, I can also open it in a browser, right? And that's one of the things that we did with this, is the ability to have it in a way that it works out of the browser, that you don't have to specify a header. So in this case, if it has a domain name, it's saying this request is coming in, and it's going with that specific host name, that domain name. And that's how Knative knows how to route it. So that's kind of like the getting started experience. So let's see what happens when we stop hitting that endpoint. So like we said, we hit the endpoint and it says hello world, because that was the environment variable, hello, and the target is world. we can see the pods. So let's see the pods that we have in here, and they're running. The thing is that after a while, this pod will start like scaling to zero, and that's where like the kind of the magic of, that's it, magic, but the benefits of Knative comes in as you are using it. So let me show you a little bit here of so it's already terminating in here. So the pod is gone, I believe. If I do kubectl pod is terminating, and it will go. This is basically the deployment going to zero. We can also do get deployments, right? If people want to investigate, and it's already set, like the deployment is set to zero, so it's just like the pod is gone. But what happens when let's run it again to watch it. What happens if we visit that website again? And this is kind of like what the Knative, most of the people know Knative for, is the scale to zero. So you can have a lot of definitions of services into one cluster, have a high density. So like you can over provision. So let's say that you can have a cluster that can run 1,000 services at the same time, right? But you have you want to be able, but that likelihood that those 1,000 servers are not going to run for at the same time, you can make a smaller cluster, save money, right? Define the 1,000 servers, the 1,000 services, and then likelihood the services will come in and out, and then you have more definitions into the cluster, and not all pods need to be running. So with that, let's visit like we said here, it scales to, we'll visit the browser in here. So we'll refresh the browser. As you can see in the terminal, now you saw activity of the pod coming up to speed, and it's already came up in 2 seconds. So that's another thing of Knative that you have to watch out. And also serverless or functions as a service, this thing called the cold start. So it's when people visit that website. I'm taking here as a website, but you know that Kubernetes, you can build, the service can be anything. It could be a service to service call. It could be a service handling other different microservices. So it doesn't have to be the front web page. Some people just make the front page that is taking the request from their page is scaled to 1. So you can configure Knative to scale to 1. But then the other ones behind it, you can scale it to 0. So that's also another pattern. So if we visit that, it scales up. And I think that's what we explain of like auto scaling. We'll go, and here there's a page. So if you can see here, it says auto scaling page. Let me see if I have my pointer. So I'll need it a little bit later. That's not what I want. I want presentation assistant. See if that shows up. Did that show up to the stream?
Yep.
Okay, I think that's a little bit better. So that's scaling, traffic splitting. Dave in the next series will go deeper into that. But just to illustrate very quickly is if I want to update that service definition, now what Knative does is it creates a revision. So every time you change the configuration of the service, Knative will stamp out a new revision, will give it a name, a random name, like unique ID with the service name, or you can give it the name. So I'm going to name this revision saying, I want a new version or revision or new version of this configuration. Go ahead and create me a new revision of this service. So we'll run this on the CLI. And now the revision name is hello, it's the service, and the name of the revision is Knative. So now I have 2 revisions. I can visit it, right? I can hit that URL. Let me see where we have it here. So what it did, it created a new revision. And by assumption or by default, it says, well, I guess that you want 100% now of your traffic to go to this new one automatically. As if you're a developer and you're trying things out and you're doing your development and debugging, that's okay. But if you want to have more control, you will do like kind of like GitOps. You will put it in YAML and control, like I'm going to create a revision, maybe give it 0% because I'm not ready, and give it 10%, right? Control that. So in this case, if I run it, automatically 100% went to this new revision. The old revision still is around. If we go and do revision list, KN revision list, you can see here that we have two revisions. One is the first one that I created was Hello World. The second one is Hello Knative, and now the new one has 100% of the traffic, and the other information is basically telling you that is ready, right? Ready equals true, ready equals true. But if I try to hit that URL, you would not hit the old revisions, just the one that has 100%. You can also create tags, like create unique URLs, put a prefix to this URL, hello, and tag the revision like this tag. And David will show that in the next series when he goes taps into this. If I want to update the traffic, I can do it in YAML, or I can do it with the CLI. So in this case, I said, make the Hello World 50, the Hello Knative 50. And now if I list them again, they will say 50-50. So if I hit the URL again with curl, I will get one of the two. You get Hello World. If I run it again, I hit it back to back, I should get Knative. So now the networking layer, in this case, Courier or Contour or Istio, is configured with that percentages. So when you see traffic coming in for this host name, split the traffic 50% and 50%, and I get Hello World and Hello Knative. But David will go deeper into that in later. So how we doing with this time? So delete that. So let me go a little bit and explain in a drawing here what we just did. If I can get a new page. Do you have any questions so far, Sai?
Yep. So there are a few questions, and there's something that I also want to share because I was trying something in the background while you were explaining things. I tried to catch up with you. So there are a couple of questions. Like, does every pod deployed has an Envoy sidecar by default?
Envoy sidecar. Every pod has a something called kube proxy. So the pod gets created. I don't know if you can see my drawing here.
Yep, we can.
And then every Knative gets a one container called, we call it this one the user container, and then it gets another one called the kube proxy. So it doesn't get Envoy. So it's a kube proxy. This is a very small container with Knative code that basically is doing the proxy. So when the request comes in, and let me rephrase. So that's normally that's a Knative thing. If you install Istio, for example, and you have Istio and you have the pods being automatically injected with the Istio sidecar, then you will get a third container, right? That will be the Envoy. But when you see the pods, let's visit again the service. But the pod, that's why it says 102, 202. The traffic comes into the kube proxy, and then the kube proxy will send into your container. And this is done for two things. The kube proxy has metrics, and also it also watches for concurrency.
Your terminal is in front.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
So the kube proxy has metrics, and it's watching the concurrency. So one thing that people the concurrency is used for, saying that maybe you have a container that can only handle one request at a time. You can set the concurrency to 1. And that matches what people are used to, maybe in Lambda or OpenWidth or functions as a service, of like one instance of this container can only handle one request at a time. And some people do it because maybe the runtime doesn't support, threading, or you have a connection to something that you're doing, some side effects that you cannot handle multi-concurrency. To me, if you have a high performance application, you will not set it to one. You will set it for multi-concurrency and just write the web server as handling as many that you want. But in by default, we set the concurrency to I think it was 80 or 100, for example. So when it gets to that point, the metrics, this is what is watching the metrics, and then another pod will spawn up. So how do you decide when there's a new pod coming in? That's the work of the queue proxy, having the metrics, so you can have the metrics. These metrics are sent to something we call the autoscaler, and this is the one that is configuring the deployment, right? So if you're familiar with Kubernetes, at the end of the day, the deployment is the one that is, you set it to 1, you set it to 2, you set it to 100. That tells Kubernetes to create new pods. So Knative is not in doing that for you, where the autoscaler is a Knative piece that is doing that, and this autoscaler is watching over the metrics. Another thing is, let's look at what happens with what I can do right here. When you are a user, so let's go, this is something that people ask. If you're a user and you're coming into the cluster and you have 0 pods, then a lot of people ask that questions like, if you have 0 pods, who's going to get that request? So what we have is something called, so the request comes in, and let's say that it's going to be example.com, for example. It will hit the ingress. In our case, it's Contour, but it could be Istio. It could be, well, in our case, it's Courier. It could be Contour. It could be the Istio. It will hit the ingress. The ingress is configured to hit, if there's 0 pods, it will be configured to hit something called, we have it, the activator. Cool names, right? The activator or activators. So we hit the activator, and the activator will say, it looks like there's no 0 pod, or it's already configured. The system is already configured to hit the activator. The activator will tell the autoscaler saying, hey, buddy, give me at least the first pod, right, to go to 1. The autoscaler will tell the deployment to get you the first pod. And a lot of people ask, if you have the activator in the middle, wouldn't this create problems with the activator scales very, very, very well. So we have multiple activators for all the services, but it reaches a point when you get to a degree of ingress traffic that then no longer you need the activator in the middle in the data path. If you have pods configured, enough pods to start receiving the traffic, then the activator gets out of the path, and then the ingress goes directly into the service, directly to the pods. So it's like working like normal Kubernetes there. Any more questions on that? Let me show you another thing.
Not at the moment. Just I quickly want to share one screen, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Okay. So let me share this completely. So I hope you are able to see the screen. So what I did in the background when Carlos was saying, I was actually doing it. So I created a 3-node K3s based cluster, which is on CO Cloud, which is called CO Kubernetes based on K3s. So obviously the cluster is spin up, in less than 2 minutes. So that was not a problem. Then, as Carlos mentioned, you can install the serving and the eventing components separately. So I went with the serving one. So we have the CRDs applied first, and then we have the serving releases, download the serving core YAML, which is obviously creating the role binding, and all the config maps and the HPAs, deployments of the activator, which Carlos just mentioned, the purpose of that, the controller, and the other deployments of that, and tons of other stuff as well. So we can see everything is getting ready, and we have the Knative serving namespace created, and after that there was this thing. We have to apply the contour. So we are having the networking piece over there, like the ingress solution over there. So we have you can have Istio as that and or as a service mesh, or you can have Glue, or you can have contour. And I think contour is being maintained by the Knative folks. So went ahead with that. So it has installed all the related components to contour. And then we have another one. There are two ones that has to be created, which actually second one creates the config map cluster role in the deployment. There's a patching so that we patch that to the ingress class, and then we get the load balancer IP for that, which is a little bit down, and here you can see that. So we have all these things. And then Knative serving, we have, I mean, I just installed another thing, which was the default creation of the cert manager in TLS, but I haven't configured that yet. In the end, it's simple command that Carlos again ran, and we again have this particular thing deployed, and you can see it here. It works as it is. So just wanted to show that how easy it is, how easy you can uh, present. I mean, how easy you can install even on a K3s cluster. So it works super fine over there as well. So yep, even you can try that from the docs. It's super simple.
So that's how you kind of stole my thunder, because I was going to show this thing that I have. I have a Cibo cluster that I
Oh,
just
awesome.
created, and I got it working with Courier. So in this case, I have a so if I do kubectx a native, um, this is a 3 worker node.
Yep.
Um, see, they're running on the cloud. And basically what I did was, so people know how to do that. Do not do the quick start that I show on that cluster, right? You will do this piece. So what I was saying was install Knative. You will install the Knative CRDs. I did that and install the core. Then the networking layer, like so I was saying, like Ambassador, Contour, Istio. I choose Courier, so I install the Courier. Told the networking class, like when you configure networking, select which one you want, and it was deployed. And then verify the installation. So I have the installation up and running. So what I did was I install, if I do kubectl get pods, let's get all the pods to see what's installed here. What I have in here is I already configured this thing with Kafka. For eventing, we'll show eventing soon. So this is serving. So serving, as you can see, some of the things that I explained. Let me sort this because I was doing this last night. So for serving, we have the components, a few components. So we have the controller, the activator, autoscaler that I was showing. We have Courier, which is a load balancer that gets created, and then automatically some daemon set gets created. So that Courier, and I applied that. What I did was for DNS is I have a real DNS, so I configure my DNS with a CNAME. So mine is csantanapr.com. So I did this piece and then configure the domain name with my domain name. So you can do temporary DNS or you can do the magic DNS. I did the real DNS because this is a real cluster. And then for optional components, I did TLS with HTTP 01. And that's the easiest way to get a certificate. Basically, the Let's Encrypt would check that I can get to it. So I went in and installed the TLS HTTP 0, and I'm able to create and then apply the patches, and it told the Knative serving component says I want auto TLS. So let's see if so that's basically what I did. I went to that page, and then those are the different options. If you have questions or you have concerns or you want to talk to someone, join our Slack and ask questions there. There's a channel called Serving Questions. I'm probably one of the folks there, or you want to talk to me, I can guide you of like what options to select here. But the default ones are very, very good one. So let's test something here. I have, if I do KN service list, and this is something that I like to do. let's delete the one that I created. So I do service uh, and service delete, and we'll delete this one, the Bitnami and GNX, just to show people. Um, and Ty, you know that a lot of like when you get started with Kubernetes, what is the most popular container that people use for testing anything, right? NGNX.
Nginx,
Um,
yeah.
so how do I make Nginx serverless and have HTTPS TLS on a real server? So basically, what I just showed you, right? We go and do a KN service create, and we'll call it Nginx dash image. I actually have it here, Nginx and port 80. Why? Because Nginx doesn't listen on 8080. If I use the Bitnami, and that's why I was using the Bitnami. If I use the Bitnami Nginx, that one is by default listening on 8080. And this is something that you need to know about your container. So if I run this, basically we're going to have Nginx running from container to URL and being serverless. So if somebody visits that website, so as you can see here, I configured the real DNS. So I have a real domain name, csantanapr.com. Well, I put demo, like a subdomain, demo.csantanapr.com with those instructions. The namespace is default, and then the name of the service Nginx. You can configure this with a config map on how do you want these domain names to be created. We also have something called domain mapping, which they will go deeper into that. But notice that it says HTTP. And the reason is if I do Knative service list again, now you can see the difference is HTTPS. It's just because it takes 1 or 2 seconds to configure the auto TLS and let's encrypt, come back to check that URL, make sure that it's okay. And if it's okay, then you have a certificate and it will configure the certificate into the ingress. In this case, it could be Contour, it could be Istio, and then configure that. But this is the value that we want to give developers, right? The ability, and I did it with the CLI, but in real productions, I would do it with GitHub, something with Argo or Flux, where I put the YAML. But just get to this level of like productivity is a very big win for the community. So I have this is like some people's like, well, that's dumb. Like if you actually work with Kubernetes and try to do this, it will take you like those 2 or 3 days of trial. So now I can just open this URL and you can visit online right now, right? I can send you this on Slack to you and you can visit it. And it's something running in Kubernetes live and it's HTTPS and you have your certificate here. It's a valid certificate. That's what the value that we wanted to get to when we explain Kubernetes. I just did it in my laptop because it was easy, but you did it on a real cluster. I did it in a real cluster. I just wanted to show you that if you configure those config maps and configure TLS, auto TLS, you get TLS for free. And basically, we have pods in here. So if we have pods, if we want to hit it hard, right, we can do hey, and we should see a bunch of pods coming up. So hey is like sending a lot of traffic to that URL, right? And if I do get pods, in a few seconds, we will see more pods coming up. The thing is, Nginx takes like 20 milliseconds to respond back, so it's hard to scale it up. But ideally, if I hit it hard enough, I should get back more pods. Well, it's not working at Dynamic. It works. If I because I'm hitting the wrong one. It's Nginx, right? Nginx. Let's see. I'm doing 100 concurrent requests. That's the default, right? That I said for 1 minute. So this thing it's hard to scale. Let's see if it's actually hitting it correctly or I mess it up again. So yeah, all of them are okay. Taking 38 milliseconds, so it's difficult to scale it up, or my machine will not scale up. So any questions before we move to eventing? I think we want to do the eventing.
Yep, let's move to the ending. There are no questions as such.
Okay, let's do eventing. So for eventing, what we're going to do is we go back to the getting started, right? We'll do eventing, and there's going to be actually 2 sessions, right, on eventing later. So I'll go very light because they're going to go deeper into this. So for eventings, we want to handle cloud events. If you're not familiar what cloud events are CNCF. So if you do cloud events, CNCF, you will find the website cloudevents.io, and this is what I'm referring to, not like something invented from Knative. This is a cloud events. It's a CNCF projects. It has a specification. Right now, what we're going to do with Knative is basically the HTTP protocol. So we go back in here, and with the same installation that we did to install Kong, that basically what we want to do. So for eventing, what we have here is, like I said before, we have sources that send events, and we want to handle the events. We can handle that event with any Kubernetes service, or we call them addressable. So it could be a external URL or host name that you point to that is through a service, external service. It could be a service inside your cluster, or it could be a Knative service. As long as you have something addressable, basically says status, the URL, and that's the sync that we have here. So these are the things that are going to handle the events. And these are the things that are going to emit events. So events could be something for CI/CD, or it could be like somebody uploaded a file to S3 on S3 bucket or Cloud Object Storage, or it could be somebody edit something in a Google spreadsheet, right? And that would emit an event. Or somebody is emitting claims, insurance claim, right? And they go to a broker. So that's what we have, a broker here. Broker is kind of a hub. And then how do you configure the system to say, I'm interested in these events, but not that event? We configure triggers, which have filters. So the triggers will say, so this the first one on the top is saying, I want to get the cloud events that are number 2, right? They have something in there that have number 2. And the bottom one is, I want the cloud events for 1. So all the events will go into the broker, and then the dispatcher, there's a dispatcher component that either would trigger one function or trigger the other one. And that's where you get into like functions as a service, where you wrap these web servers as functions, right? Functions that handle events, and the events becomes parameters. So with that said, let's go over the demo. It's very easy. I need to go back. Let me see if we can do it in the cloud. So we have the broker here, and this one is a Kafka broker. If I want to go back to my kind cluster, I can do kind Knative. Let's see if that's kubectx, not ctl. Right, so people like feel familiar that this is a demo that they can run in the laptop. So let's see, we are back in get pods -a. So we have eventing. I install eventing. So for this demo, you only need the eventing. If you're going to do eventing, you don't need serving, and the other way around. So let's see if we have brokers after installing. So brokers that you configure. So in this case, it's in memory. You saw that I have Kafka in the other one. So the thing is, it doesn't matter if it's RabbitMQ, Kafka, or in memory. The programming model is still the same. So the same YAMLs, you can take them from testing locally to running in production in the cloud. So you need a broker, and the broker has a programmable URL that you can get from a service. The next step is we're going to use a little utility called the Cloud Player installer. So let me see if I already have installed. So let me install it here. This is a little web app that has a GUI that let us like send cloud events and also receive cloud events. So it will serve as the source, and it will also serve as the sink. And we use it here because it's visual. So people to kind of like grok the components, we use this, and that's the URL. And guess what? It's a Knative service, so it scales to 0. If we open that URL, let's open that URL. This is the cloud event. Let me see if it shows up. Yep. And then if we follow the instructions, is let's send the first event. So we'll put a so the cloud event has different properties as I was showing the specification. So you go to the specification of the cloud event. It has the event format has different properties like an event type. Let me show it here. It has a type, an ID, a source. So type and source is something that you can filter with. If we go back and we want to send an event, it says here that we can put anything we want in this GUI. So we'll put here, where's the GUI? We'll put that this is event ID number 1. Some type, we'll put some type here. We'll put event source, we'll put some source here, and then send an event. So that's an event that was sent to the broker, but nobody's listening, right? So there's nothing happening. If we go back, so we are able to like send events to the broker. So there's different plugins, and even like a company that is partners with Knative called Trigger Mesh from the beginning. They also have a lot of plugins to get events from different cloud providers and so on. We have IBM Code Engine that you can get events from, for example, from a cloud object storage. So if you upload a movie or a file in Code Engine, which is the implementation of Knative in IBM Cloud, that's also a source. So there's different sources available out there. In this case, we're going to create a trigger. So the trigger is that says, I want to listen for these events, send them my way. So we'll create a trigger, and we'll do this with the CLI. So I'm creating a trigger, call it Cloud Events Trigger. The sync is the player, so we can see it in the GUI. And then the broker is example broker, which is the name of our broker. When you do this, now you have a trigger. If you do kn trigger list, now we have a trigger saying that any event that goes into this broker, go ahead and send it to the player. So we'll go and send another event. So in this case, we're going to send an event. Yeah, we'll send another event. We'll call this one number 2. Send number 2, and we'll send it. As you can see here, the first event, nobody listened for it. And then the second event, it was sent. So also sent, but it was received. So it went to the broker and it came back to the GUI. So that's a quick way to validate that your setup is working and your function got the event. You see, and then I think that's it. Another way that you can do this, this is another example for it. If you want to like actually see what is a cloud event, it's just a HTTP request that you can do. So for example, if I want to expose this broker as a URL, I can use domain mapping. So let me create a domain mapping here. Let me see where I can do this, or I can do let's do this better. If I run this thing, right, I can run a pod, and I want to send events to that broker. I can send an event to that broker this way. Or I can do an event mapping. Let me see if I can do an event mapping. I think that's better. So this is something that is in serving that I do. Let me show it here. I don't think I show my screen. So I can do a domain mapping that I want to expose that broker out, and I want to expose it in a URL so it becomes exposed outside. It's exposed in my laptop. So I can run this command to whitelist with domain mapping, and then I can run this command to create the domain mapping URL. And this is what it's doing, is creating a URL or a host name that is available outside the cluster, but it will hit the broker. So I can specify a reference. So the broker is a service. So any Kubernetes service, I can make it a URL. So now this is a URL I can hit with curl, right? Our famous curl. So if I go and do a curl like this, right? I'm sending events. Let me clear this. I'm sending a curl. Do you see this? Sending a curl now to that broker, to that example broker. And these are the properties I'm sending: the ID, the spec version, the type is greeting, the source is not sent off, content type is application JSON, and the message is hello Knative. So I can send that URL, and it was sent to the broker. Actually, we can go into the player and see if well, the player won't get it, but I can create a service now called the event. I think I have one. Let me see. Kget kn service list. I have cloud event player. I can create one called event display that we use to dump messages. Let me see if I have the image here. So I can create one that is like dumping just for debugging purposes. This is one that I use all the time. Anytime that I want to like display if I'm getting the cloud event correctly or not, I use the event display, and I set it to scale min to 1, so it doesn't scale to 0. So this is another way of managing the scale to 0 or not to scale to 0. So if I do that, but nobody's listening, we go back to the trigger. So we have to create a trigger to say, when I send a message with a filter, let's say greeting, I want the event display to get it. Or in this case, cloud event player, I can say the cloud event player to get it. So let's create a trigger. I have a trigger here. So what I'm going to do is say create a trigger saying, put it here. I'm going to create a trigger called event display trigger. The sync is that service. The broker is a sample broker. And the filter is do not send me all the cloud events. Just send me the cloud events that have type equals greeting. So I can create that and now have what? Two triggers? Two triggers. One for cloud events trigger, and the other one for event display trigger. And one thing that I can do is, let me split my terminal here. I'll use Stern. And Stern is watching over that event display, just the output. So the event display just gets an event display and just prints out in the logs what it gets to. So now we can run that cloud event again, curl. Let's send another event if I can find the curl, or just let me copy paste it again. So I can send it like this. Nope. I send it. Where did I put it? Where's my cloud event? I think it's this one. We can run this one, right? And every time I send an event, the event display displays the information. So in this case, I'm doing a filter trigger where the other one was not doing a filter trigger, which should also get it. Let me double check why it's not getting. Yeah, so it got the event. I know what happened. This event player is a Knative service, so it went to 0. So that's why it's not getting it. So the event display is a Knative service, so it goes down to 0. I can set it to min scale to 1, so it only scales to 1. So if I send another event, I keep sending events, right? I can send 1,000 events. They are all here. So the player is actually getting them. It's just, I think I didn't see them because it went to 0. Actually, if I do get pods, you have the event player, and in a minute or two, that event player will scale to 0 and disappear. Also for, so as you can see, this is Knative is something that can be useful in terms of having a cluster for testing, for CI/CD and things like that, that you don't need to have everything running at the same time, or have, if you look at some CI/CD systems, and that's also Tecton is kind of like serverless. When a Tecton task runs, it creates a pod, it does its job, and it ends. So it's kind of like Kubernetes jobs, right? In this case, these are URLs that are available at any time. So when the URL gets hit in the ingress, then the ingress based on the host name, and that's called the key aspect of routing is the host name. Another myth or misconception is a lot of people think that when you create a Knative service, that service is exposed in the public. So now anyone can hack you and get to that URL. The default is true. So when you create a Knative service with the CLI, for example, or the YAML, and you don't say that you only want it internal, it will do all the work that usually we want. We want to expose a URL, but you can go ahead and say like, please do not expose me a URL or host name outside the cluster. And that way, the routing is configured that it doesn't accept anything coming from outside the cluster. But you can call it from inside the cluster. So if you have service 1 and service 2 in a single namespace, you would not use the domain name to go outside to call service 2. You would just call the service 1. So in this case, let me show you what are the services here. Get service. A little bit smaller. So in normal Kubernetes, when you want to talk from one service to another service, and they're in the same namespace, what typically you do, right? You just call the service name. You don't put dot namespace. In Knative, something that people, find it differently, and this is different in Knative. You cannot call one service to another service without the dot namespace. Why? Because all the traffics, remember the activator and the ingress, all traffic needs to go to that ingress component to contour, courier, or Istio, for example, but it will go through the internal networking of Kubernetes. So to find it, if I want to access, for example, the Cloud Player, see the service here for Cloud Player? It's Cloud Player. The other ones are for revision, so you can hit a specific revision in there. But if I want to hit this from another pod, I need to put the namespace because the ingress is for the whole cluster. So when a request comes in, it needs to know, like, if you're going to hit Cloud Event Player or hello, which hello of all the hellos in the cluster. You need to do dot namespace, right? Dot default or dot something. So let me end with that to show you that if we can get it. So if I'm going to create, let's say, service create hello. Yeah, let's create hello. And I don't want to access that through externally. I can set it up only cluster local. So now I have get service, right? And I have a hello, and I have a hello world, which is the revision. So if I want to hit hello, I can do from another pod. Let me try curl. I think this is what I had curl here for. So if I try to do HTTP hello, usually this is what you program in Kubernetes. You want to hit another service in the namespace, you just do curl hello, and that doesn't work because it went through the ingress and the ingress didn't find the hello. But if I do curl hello dot default, it found it. So it says hello world in here. So that's just a tip. If you're working with Knative, program your maybe a config map or something like that, that the address to find the other service, always make it a habit to put dot namespace when you configure your CI/CD or your DevOps. And that way, all the communication from service to service inside the cluster is serverless, but not exposed onto the public. Maybe you want to expose one, like the web page, right? One route, right, externally, and then the other 5 microservices all talking to each other. They're all serverless, but talking through the internal cluster route, cluster internal cluster.local. And I think with that, I don't think we have time to go deeper than that.
Yep. And yeah, first of all, Carlos, those were the amazing demos. I mean, it was complete like I would say a Knative 101 workshop that we just did in a short amount of time because I was doing things parallelly and I was able to follow. So if anybody who was watching live or who will be watching later, if they are planning or they will be doing it with the time that you are speaking, I think they'll be able to follow. Obviously they can pause in between, understand, and then then proceed with that. But that was really a very insightful overview of how Knative works with respect to eventing, with respect to serving. And obviously in the end, the tip that you gave, like how to access a service from a different pod using the namespace and not directly. So that is also very good, so that you can program Kubernetes in the same way when you are using Knative. Obviously, you might have seen people struggling with that, so I think that's a very good tip for the people who are getting started with Knative. And I really enjoyed this session, and I can see all of the chat that people have just loved this session. So hands-on session, so you can see all the chats are there and they are loving it. So people have loved the demo rich explanation of the Knative eventing in the serving. So for everyone, so this is a series, and this was the second video, and the next ones will be like the deep dive session. So deep dive on eventing, deep dive on serving. So make sure you perform all these. So that you again have a good amount of experience with at least deploying the demo applications, try to communicate with each other, try to set up the broker, and send some cloud events, receive them, so that you have the base ready for the next set of streams. So try and set up a cluster, maybe on Civo Kubernetes, or maybe locally on Kind, and anything that you prefer. So make sure you do that. Try out these demos. I think the docs look pretty neat, and I think you don't have to do anything. So just follow the documentation. It's super neat. So just follow that and try to set up Knative serving, perform the demo, then set up Knative eventing, perform the demo, and then do the next set of streams. So tomorrow is the obviously the next stream. So make sure you join that as well. And before that, please care to listen to this completely and try to perform the demos as well, so that you understand the next streams really well, so that you can make most out of the next stream. So that's the only thing that I would like to say. And yeah, thank you all for joining in, and it was really awesome to have you, Carlos. Anything else you want to say to the community?
No, just join us in Slack. Tomorrow there's a double feature. First, I think first will be David. I think no, yeah, David, and then the meetup. So we have a Knative. We do a Knative meetup every month. So coincidentally, tomorrow we have a Knative series from you show, but also we have a meetup on Knative, and the demo is going to be cool. So a lot of people ask me like, how do I do this traffic splitting, but doing a rollout? So if I want to do a rollout like 10%, 20%, until you get 100%, a lot of people do it with kubectl, but nobody wants to do a kubectl. We want to do it with Argo and GitOps. While that percentage is changing, go back to Git and put the YAML, edit the YAML, and do it in an experiment. So we have the folks from IBM Research Co. with a project called Ether 8, so they can show you like the full automation using AI to go rollouts, but also edit the Git. So Argo is the one deploying. So I think that's a team that I've been working on, giving them the use cases that I see for enterprises. Because when you go into production, actually, that's how you deploy these type of things, not the way I showed it. The way I showed you was kind of like the getting started and learning how to use tools. When you go to enterprise, you want to use GitOps and CI/CD and DevSecOps pipelines.
Awesome. So basically, tomorrow you all have two amazing sessions that are coming in, and make sure you join them because Knative is dope. I told in the previous stream as well, and I think this is the getting onto the point and making a real impact in the enterprise world. And it is not governed by a single organization. There are many folks involved, multiple people in the community involved. So make sure you join that community in the Slack, and make sure you just interact with them, ask questions, deploy, do demos, try it out, and then roll your productions. So with that, I'll leave you to the rest of your days. Thank you so much for joining in, everyone, and have a nice day. Make sure you subscribe to the channel because that's very important. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time. Bye.
Yeah. See you. Bye.